I am Clara, 33 years old, and my brother just pointed to a plastic folding chair next to the kitchen trash cans inside Chicago's most exclusive steakhouse. Sorry, this table is for family only. He smirked, his voice carrying over the clinking crystal and hushed conversations of the elite dining room. I just smiled, looked at the $5,000 dinner spread they were ordering, and calmly sat down by the garbage. Because before this night was over, I would walk out and leave him stranded with a bill he could not pay and an ego completely shattered. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to cut ties with toxic family to protect your peace. The air inside the restaurant was thick with the scent of aged mahogany and seared Wagyu beef. This was not just a dinner. It was a coronation. We were gathered to celebrate my brother Jason, who at 35 had just closed on a $3 million mansion in the suburbs. Jason was the golden child. He was a credit director at a major bank, a title my parents wielded like a royal decree. They wore his success like a badge of honor, completely ignoring the fact that his lifestyle was a fragile house of cards. I arrived 10 minutes early wearing a simple, sharp suit. I had barely stepped onto the plush carpet of the private dining area when Jason stepped directly into my path. He adjusted his expensive silk tie, looking down at me with the same disdain he had perfected since we were teenagers. The main table was a sprawling masterpiece of white linen, silver cutlery, and massive floral centerpieces. My parents, William and Beatrice, were already seated sipping expensive champagne. Jason blocked my view of the table. Sorry, Clara. This table is for family only. He did not whisper. He wanted the audience. He raised his hand and pointed past the luxurious dining area, right toward the swinging wooden doors of the kitchen. A waiter hurried past, nearly knocking over a cheap metal folding chair that had been awkwardly shoved against the wall next to a busing station and a trash receptacle. You can sit over there. The humiliation was designed to break me. I could feel the eyes of other wealthy patrons darting toward us, their hushed whispers filling the space. For a moment, the heavy silence felt suffocating. But I did not cry. I did not scream. I simply looked at his smug, arrogant face. The jazz band in the corner played a soft, upbeat tune that completely masked the cruelty happening at our table. Waiters in crisp white tuxedos glided across the room, offering impeccable service to everyone except me. Jason always needed an audience for his cruelty. It was not enough for him to simply be successful. He needed me to be a failure. He needed a contrast to make his fake shine look real. My mother Beatrice let out a sharp, theatrical laugh from the main table. She leaned over to Jason's wife, Naomi. Naomi was 34, a brilliant and proud African-American woman who came from a highly educated, deeply respected family in Atlanta. Naomi possessed a sharp mind and a strong sense of dignity, but over the years, she had been slowly worn down by my family's relentless manipulation. Beatrice patted Naomi's hand, speaking loudly enough for the entire room to hear. Do not worry about Clara, Naomi. You know how she is. She is just a low-level office worker. Her showing up here in that cheap suit is an embarrassment to Jason's executive status. We cannot have her bringing down the mood at the main table. It is bad for his image. Naomi shifted uncomfortably in her seat. I saw a flicker of conflict in her eyes. She came from a lineage of judges and civil rights attorneys. She expected dignity and integrity. When Jason courted her, he presented our family as a beacon of northern sophistication and financial stability. He hid his toxic, narcissistic traits behind expensive gifts and grand romantic gestures. But tonight, I could see the cracks forming in her perception. Naomi glanced at the folding chair by the kitchen doors, then down at her napkin. She stayed quiet, conditioned to keep the peace and play along with the toxic dynamic my parents demanded. She had no idea the financial disaster she was legally tied to, but she was too smart not to sense the cruelty in the room. My father, William, did not even look up from his menu. He simply took another sip of his drink, his silence acting as the ultimate endorsement of Jason's bullying. I walked over to the folding chair. The smell of discarded food and bleach wafted from the kitchen every time the doors swung open. Waiters rushed past me, their elbows brushing my shoulder as they carried heavy trays of sizzling steaks and towering seafood platters. The physical discomfort of sitting on cold metal while my family lounged on velvet chairs was nothing compared to the emotional betrayal. But as I sat there, isolated and publicly shamed, a profound sense of icy clarity washed over me. I watched them order the most expensive items on the menu. Lobster tails imported caviar bottles of wine that cost more than a mortgage payment. They laughed and toasted to Jason's incredible success, completely oblivious to the reality of their situation. They thought I was a failure. They truly believed I was a struggling administrative assistant barely making rent. For years, I had kept my life entirely separate from them. I had endured their endless mockery at Thanksgiving dinners, their sneering comments about my lack of ambition, and their constant demands that I defer to Jason's brilliance. They had no idea that while they were spending money they did not have, I had been building an empire. I am the founder and CEO of a highly successful financial technology firm. My company specializes in deep-level auditing and real estate fraud detection. I have spent the last decade coding networking and scaling my business into a multi-million-dollar enterprise. I did not buy flashy cars. I did not boast on social media. I quietly amassed wealth and power while they worshipped Jason's hollow corporate title. Sitting by the trash can, I pulled out my phone and checked a secure email from my lead corporate attorney. The documents I had requested were ready. I looked up and watched Jason raise his glass, boasting about his new mansion, soaking in our parents' absolute adoration. He was so arrogant, so utterly convinced of his own superiority. He did not know that his credit cards were silently declining across the city. He did not know that his entire life was built on a foundation of lies and stolen money. And most importantly, he had no idea that the woman he just forced to sit by the garbage was the only person who held the keys to his complete and total destruction. I crossed my legs, smoothed the fabric of my suit, and waited. The trap was set, the stage was perfectly lit, and the bill was coming. I just had to wait for the exact right moment to watch their perfect illusion burn to the ground. The extravagant feast dragged on for nearly 2 excruciating hours. From my secluded spot near the swinging kitchen doors, I watched my family gorge themselves with absolute gluttony. Jason and Beatrice treated the menu like a personal challenge, pointing at the most aggressively priced items with casual arrogance. They ordered towering plateaus of chilled seafood caviar service with pearl spoons and thick cuts of dry-aged Wagyu beef that sizzled on hot stones. Beatrice loudly demanded 3 bottles of a rare vintage Cabernet, ensuring the sommelier knew she expected VIP treatment. My father William tore through a butter-poached lobster, occasionally raising his glass to toast Jason's fabricated brilliance. They devoured the meal in a spectacle of excess, completely ignoring my existence in the corner. I sat with a single glass of tap water observing the grotesque display. Naomi picked at her salad, her posture growing increasingly rigid as she watched her husband and mother-in-law order thousands of dollars worth of food without a second thought. She clearly believed Jason could afford it, blinded by the executive facade he had meticulously built to trap her. She had no idea the financial cliff they were speeding toward. Finally, the plates were cleared, replaced by an absurd flaming dessert that required the waiter to ignite a pool of rum right at the table. Jason leaned back in his velvet chair, unbuttoning his suit jacket with a satisfied sigh. He boasted loudly about his recent closing bonus, making sure the neighboring tables of wealthy Chicago socialites could hear every inflated detail. Then came the moment I had been waiting for. A senior waiter approached the table carrying a heavy black leather folio. He placed it discreetly near my father, but Jason immediately snatched it up. He did not even bother to check the itemized receipt. He knew exactly what he was doing. A cruel, calculated smirk spread across his face as he pushed his chair back. The heavy wood scraped against the floor, drawing the attention of everyone in the dining room. He held the leather folder up like a trophy and began walking away from the main table, heading straight toward my plastic folding chair by the garbage bins. The entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath. The ambient chatter died down, leaving only the soft jazz music echoing through the tension-filled air. Jason stopped right in front of me, his shadow blocking the dim lighting. Without a word of greeting, he tossed the heavy leather folio directly into my lap. It hit my thighs with a soft thud. I looked down at the receipt peeking out from the edge. The total printed at the bottom was a staggering $5,432. Jason crossed his arms and projected his voice so every patron in our section could hear his authority. "You are paying tonight, Clara," he declared, dripping with condescension. "Consider it back rent. We housed you, fed you, and put up with your lazy attitude all through your college years, while you sat in your childhood bedroom contributing absolutely nothing to this family. It is time you finally paid your parents back for their generosity. Go ahead and put it on your little debit card, if it will even go through." A collective gasp rippled through the nearby tables. Wealthy diners paused with their wine glasses halfway to their mouths, staring in open shock at the sheer cruelty of his demand. At the main table, Naomi looked horrified, her eyes darting between Jason and me in sudden realization of how sick this family dynamic truly was. But Beatrice simply laughed, taking another sip of her expensive Cabernet. "It is the least she can do," my mother announced loudly, waving her hand in my direction. "She has been a financial drain on us for long enough." William nodded in agreement, wiping his mouth with a linen napkin. They genuinely expected me to break down. They expected me to cry, beg, or humiliate myself by admitting I could not afford a $5,000 dinner I was not even allowed to eat. Instead of crying, I looked down at the bill and let out a soft, genuine chuckle. I picked up the leather folio, feeling the weight of their impending doom in my hands. I stood up slowly from the plastic chair, smoothing the invisible wrinkles from my custom-tailored suit. I looked Jason dead in the eyes. My gaze was so terrifyingly calm that his smug smile faltered for a fraction of a second. I did not raise my voice. I did not throw a tantrum. I simply turned my head toward the senior waiter, who was standing a few feet away, watching the exchange with wide, uncomfortable eyes. I held the folio out to him. "I am sorry," I said, my voice cutting through the silent room like a blade of ice, "but this is not my table." I dropped the black leather folder onto an empty tray nearby. Then, without sparing another glance at my brother, my parents, or the extravagant feast they had just consumed, I turned my back. I walked purposefully toward the grand front doors of the steakhouse, my heels clicking rhythmically against the hardwood floor. I could feel Jason staring holes into my back, assuming I was running away in defeat. He thought he had won. He thought I was fleeing out of poverty and shame. What Jason did not know was that earlier this afternoon, my financial compliance software had flagged his accounts. I knew for an absolute fact that every single one of his credit cards was currently suspended for severe limit breaches. His secret fraudulent debts had finally caught up to him. I pushed through the heavy glass doors and stepped out into the cool Chicago night air, leaving them completely stranded with a $5,000 bill they had absolutely no way of paying. The cool Chicago breeze felt incredibly refreshing against my skin as I descended the marble steps of the steakhouse. A sleek black Maybach idled at the curb, its tinted windows gleaming under the streetlights. My driver immediately stepped out and opened the rear door for me. I slid into the plush leather interior, the quiet luxury of the cabin, a stark contrast to the chaotic dining room I had just left behind. Before the car even pulled away from the curb, my phone vibrated inside my purse. I pulled out the device and watched the screen light up with an absolute avalanche of notifications from our family group chat. The panic inside that restaurant must have been instantaneous. My father William sent the first barrage of furious messages. "You are an absolute disgrace to this family." He typed the capitalized letters, radiating his rage. "Get back here right now and pay this bill. You have ruined your brother's celebration. How dare you walk out on us?" A few seconds later, Naomi chimed in. Her text was completely devoid of the usual dignified grace she prided herself on. "Clara, this is entirely unacceptable. Walking out on your family and refusing to cover your share of a celebratory dinner shows a severe lack of basic manners. I expected better from you. Do not expect Jason to forgive this easily." I stared at Naomi's message, feeling a brief flash of genuine pity. She still thought Jason was the victim. She still believed the narrative he had spun for her, the illusion of the wealthy, successful bank executive who generously tolerated his underachieving sister. She had absolutely no idea that her husband was currently sweating through his designer suit, trying to explain why his premium credit cards were declining. I did not bother typing a reply to any of them. I simply switched my phone to silent mode, tossed it onto the empty passenger seat, and poured myself a glass of sparkling water from the car's chilled console. As the Maybach glided smoothly through the vibrant downtown streets, the neon reflections bouncing across the tinted glass, I allowed myself to fully process the reality of my existence. For my entire life, my family had treated me like dirt beneath their shoes. They cast me in the role of the perpetual disappointment, the untalented, unmotivated middle child, who would never amount to anything of value. They genuinely believed I spent my days filing papers in a dreary cubicle, barely scraping together enough pennies to survive. They required me to be a complete failure so Jason could feel like an absolute god. The truth was different. I was not a struggling administrative assistant. I was the founder and CEO of a highly successful financial technology firm. My company, which I had built from absolutely nothing over the last grueling decade, specialized in deep-level auditing and real estate fraud detection. We engineered proprietary algorithms that banks and federal agencies use to identify embezzlement, money laundering, and illicit mortgage leveraging. My software was currently deployed by 3 of the largest financial institutions in North America. While Jason spent his 20s relying on our parents' wealth to fund his fraternity parties and luxury car leases, I was eating instant noodles in a cramped studio apartment coding until my eyes bled. While my mother was busy parading Jason around her country club as a financial prodigy, I was quietly securing venture capital funding from some of the most ruthless investors in Silicon Valley. I never asked my parents for a single dime. I never expected their support, and they certainly never offered it. They were too busy pouring every available resource into Jason, convinced he was the only child capable of carrying the family legacy. I kept my success completely hidden from them. It was a conscious, highly calculated decision. I knew that the moment William and Beatrice discovered I possessed significant wealth, their entire dynamic would violently shift. They would not apologize for years of emotional abuse. They would simply pivot, demanding I use my money to elevate Jason even further. They would expect me to fund his extravagant lifestyle, to buy his love, and to serve as a silent bankroll for their performative societal status. I refused to let my hard-earned empire become a piggy bank for the very people who spent my entire life trying to break my spirit. My business required me to see through financial illusions. I trained my entire staff to spot the hidden liabilities that arrogant men tried to sweep under the rug. I knew exactly what real wealth looked like, and more importantly, I knew exactly what desperate failing debt looked like. Jason was a textbook case study in financial fraud. He possessed the title of a bank credit director, but his personal finances were a catastrophic mess of over-leveraged loans, secret lines of credit, and desperate borrowing. He bought a $3 million mansion to impress Naomi and her prominent Atlanta family, but he did not have the actual capital to sustain it. Looking out the window at the towering skyscrapers, I felt a deep sense of validation. The little girl they used to mock had grown up to become the exact kind of apex predator their fragile financial world feared most. I did not just have money. I had ultimate power, pristine information, and the undeniable proof of everything Jason had done in the dark. The $5,000 restaurant bill was merely a tiny crack in the dam. The real flood was coming tomorrow morning, and I was going to be the one to open the floodgates. I picked up my phone again. It displayed 47 missed calls from my father and 22 from Jason. They were panicking. The restaurant manager had likely threatened to call the police by now. I set the phone face down, leaned back into the premium leather seat, and closed my eyes. The war had officially begun, and I held every single winning card. The sun rose over Chicago, casting sharp geometric shadows across my penthouse bedroom. I slept perfectly. Waking up the morning after leaving your toxic family stranded with a massive bill brings a unique kind of peace. I poured myself a black coffee dressed in a charcoal gray power suit and headed to my downtown office. I expected the day to be focused entirely on finalizing the acquisition of the auditing firm. I did not expect the phone call that would shatter the last remaining fragment of my familial empathy. It was exactly 9 in the morning when Benjamin, my senior private wealth manager, called my direct line. He rarely contacted me unless a transaction required my immediate verbal authorization or if an anomaly triggered our security protocols. "Clara, we have a situation," Benjamin said, his voice stripped of its usual cheerful professionalism. "Our automated monitoring system flagged a major liability alert connected to an asset linked to your primary accounts. 5 years ago, before my financial technology company exploded into an industry giant, I made my first significant real estate purchase. It was a modest, beautifully kept suburban house. I paid for it entirely in cash. At the time, my mother Beatrice had come to me weeping. She claimed my father's business investments were failing, and she had absolutely no assets to her name. She begged me for financial security, playing the role of a terrified, vulnerable woman. Like a fool, I listened to my lingering, daughterly guilt. I transferred the deed of that suburban house solely into Beatrice's name, wanting her to feel safe. I continued paying the property taxes and maintenance through a blind trust, assuming the house would just sit quietly as her safety net. Benjamin pulled up the deed records on his end. "The property in your mother's name just had a massive secondary lien attached to it," he explained. "A second mortgage was approved and finalized late yesterday afternoon. They leveraged 90% of the home's equity. The funds were dispersed immediately." I stopped breathing for a fraction of a second. William and Beatrice had zero income to support a loan of that magnitude. "How did they clear underwriting?" I asked, my voice dangerously flat. "They used a specialized private lender," Benjamin replied. "The kind that bypasses traditional income verification if the asset is owned free and clear. The interest rate is incredibly predatory, but they got the cash. Clara, the money did not stay in your mother's account. The entire lump sum was wired directly to an external account belonging to Jason." The puzzle pieces snapped together with sickening clarity. Jason's $3 million mansion. The massive down payment he needed to secure the keys before his extravagant housewarming party. He did not have the cash. His credit was completely maxed out. So he turned to William and Beatrice. And my parents, utterly obsessed with maintaining Jason's image as the successful golden child, looked at the only valuable asset they had access to. My house. The house I bought with blood, sweat, and endless sleepless nights. They mortgaged the gift I gave them out of pity to fund Jason's delusions of grandeur. I stood up and walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows of my office. The city stretched out below me, sprawling and indifferent. A cold, heavy silence settled over my mind. They literally stole from me. It was not just favoritism anymore. It was not just emotional neglect or cruel comments at dinner tables. This was calculated, malicious theft. Beatrice had weaponized her tears to secure my property, only to hand the equity over to the son who spent his entire life abusing me. They drained my hard-earned money to buy Jason a temporary throne. The audacity was staggering. Just last night, Jason threw a $5,000 dinner bill in my lap, mocking me for living in my childhood bedroom and demanding back rent. He stood there dripping with arrogance, acting like a self-made titan of industry, while literally funding his entire lavish lifestyle with money stolen from my suburban property. My parents sat at that steakhouse table laughing at me, drinking premium wine, knowing exactly what they had done. They looked me in the eye and treated me like a failure, fully aware that my financial success was the only reason Jason could afford his new mansion. They fed off me like parasites. They thought I was completely oblivious. Because the deed was technically in Beatrice's name, they believed they had executed the perfect crime. They assumed I would never find out, or if I did, I would be too weak and poor to do anything about it. They thought I was still the insecure girl, desperate for their approval, the girl who would silently absorb the financial ruin to keep the peace. "Benjamin," I said, breaking the silence. My voice did not shake. There were no tears in my eyes. "Trace the exact wire transfer." I want the routing numbers, the authorization signatures, and the corresponding loan documents from that private lender. Get me everything. Consider it done, Benjamin said. What is our next move? We let them spend it, I replied, a dark, terrible smile forming on my face. We let Jason move his pregnant wife into that mansion. We let him invite his boss and his wealthy friends. We let him build his entire identity on that stolen equity. I ended the call and placed my phone precisely in the center of my desk. The betrayal should have broken me. A normal daughter would be devastated. A normal sister would be crying on the floor asking why she was never enough. But I was not a normal daughter anymore. I was a CEO who dismantled financial criminals for a living. My parents had just handed me the ultimate weapon. By committing wire fraud and illegally leveraging an asset linked to my accounts, they had crossed a legal boundary that completely destroyed any remaining moral obligation I had toward them. Jason's mansion was not his. It was built on a foundation of my money backed by fraudulent applications. He had inadvertently tied his entire public persona to a crime I could expose with a single phone call. The war was no longer just about humiliation. It was about absolute total annihilation. I would not just leave them with an unpaid restaurant bill. I would rip the roof off Jason's stolen mansion and let the whole world see the pathetic, desperate criminals hiding inside. My desk phone remained silent, but my personal cell phone vibrated violently against the polished mahogany wood of my desk. The caller ID flashed Jason's name in bright white letters. I stared at the screen, watching it vibrate, genuinely marveling at the sheer audacity of the man on the other end. Less than 12 hours ago, he had publicly humiliated me at a high-end steakhouse and attempted to stick me with a $5,000 bill he could not pay. A normal person might call to apologize, or at least to scream defensively about the embarrassment of having their premium credit cards declined in front of the waitstaff. Jason was not a normal person. I picked up the phone and accepted the call, pressing the device to my ear without saying a single word. "Clara, listen to me very carefully," Jason barked the moment the line connected. His voice was completely devoid of shame, hesitation, or remorse. There was no embarrassment over the restaurant fiasco. Instead, he spoke with the brisk, commanding tone of an executive giving orders to a lowly subordinate. "I am not calling to discuss your little tantrum last night. Walking out on your family was pathetic, but frankly, I expect nothing less from you at this point. I am calling to give you your 30-day notice." I remained perfectly still in my leather office chair, my eyes fixed on the city skyline. Notice for what exactly, I asked, my voice smooth and betraying absolutely zero emotion. "Notice to vacate the property," he snapped, sighing heavily into the receiver as if dealing with my existence was physically exhausting. Mom, Dad, and I had a long family meeting this morning. We have made some executive financial decisions. We are going to sell the suburban house to liquidate assets. My new mansion requires a substantial amount of capital for custom renovations, landscaping, and premium furnishings. Naomi is pregnant. We are starting a real legacy. We need the cash right now, a lot more than a single failure like you needs a whole house to herself. I listened to the sound of his impatient breathing over the line, analyzing the breathtaking psychological delusion required to speak those words. He genuinely thought the house belonged to William and Beatrice. Because I had placed the deed in our mother's name 5 years ago to give her peace of mind, Jason believed the property was part of their personal portfolio ready to be harvested for his exclusive benefit. He had no idea that I paid for every brick, every shingle, and every blade of grass with cash I had earned through grueling corporate audits. He also had no idea that I already knew they had illegally leveraged the property just 24 hours prior. He was not selling it. He had already stolen the equity and was now trying to kick me out to cover his tracks and avoid paying the secondary mortgage. "You want me to pack up my belongings and move out of the house I have lived in for 5 years, I stated calmly, repeating his demand back to him to ensure I heard the exact parameters of his delusion. "So you can use the funds for your new mansion." "Exactly," Jason said, his voice dripping with intense condescension. "You should be packing boxes right now instead of asking stupid questions. It is time you stopped leeching off our parents. You have been squatting in their investment property long enough. Look at it this way, Clara. You finally get to be useful. Be grateful you get to contribute to my success for once in your miserable life. Naomi deserves a perfect home to raise my child in, and you are going to facilitate that. Consider it your back rent being paid in full. The sheer magnitude of his entitlement was sickening. He was essentially ordering me to render myself homeless so he could fund a nursery that was 3 times the size of my first apartment. He was demanding my profound gratitude while literally robbing me blind. He was using his unborn child as a weapon to justify extreme financial abuse, perfectly mirroring the manipulative tactics Beatrice had used on me for 33 years. Are Mom and Dad fully aware that you are demanding? I vacate the premises immediately, I asked, needing to hear him confirm their absolute complicity in this scheme. Mom was the one who suggested it? Jason scoffed, completely oblivious to the trap he was actively walking into. She said you need to learn how the real world works and figure out your own housing. They are entirely focused on helping me and Naomi get settled into our new neighborhood. So I suggest you start looking for a cheap studio apartment. Maybe find some roommates online. You have 30 days to get your trash out of the house before we list it on the market. Do not make me send a formal eviction crew. I did not scream. I did not hurl insults through the phone. I did not demand to know how he slept at night knowing he was a parasite feeding on my invisible labor. I did not shed a single tear for the brother who hated me, or the parents who eagerly offered me up as a sacrificial lamb for his comfort. I understand completely, Jason, I said, my voice dropping to a low, chilling whisper. You and Mom have made your positions incredibly clear. I will handle my housing situation and you will get exactly what you deserve. I ended the call abruptly and placed the phone back on my desk. The silence in my office was absolute and ringing. A profound, icy realization settled deep into my bones, freezing any lingering traces of familial loyalty I might have unknowingly harbored. They did not see me as a daughter. They did not see me as a sister. They did not even see me as a human being with basic needs for shelter, stability, and security. They viewed me entirely as a financial host, a disposable resource, existing solely to be drained dry whenever Jason required a boost to his fragile ego. Beatrice had weaponized my empathy to get her name on that deed. William had looked the other way while Jason extracted the equity to line his own pockets. Now Jason was orchestrating my immediate eviction to hide the massive fraud they had committed together. They were a syndicate of emotional vampires, and they had just declared absolute war on the wrong woman. I walked back over to the expansive glass windows overlooking the Chicago skyline. The fear and insecurity that had plagued my youth evaporated, replaced by a ruthless mechanical focus. They wanted to liquidate assets. They wanted to play high-stakes real estate games. They wanted to throw their weight around and act like titans of industry while crushing me under their heels. I would gladly oblige them. I would let them step into the arena they thought they controlled, and then I would systematically dismantle every single pillar of their fraudulent lives. The time for hiding my wealth and protecting their feelings was officially over. I turned away from the window and walked toward my office door, ready to bring their entire world crashing down. I pulled open my heavy oak office door and stepped out into the main operations floor of my financial technology headquarters. The space was a massive open-concept marvel of modern architecture, encased entirely in floor-to-ceiling glass. Rows of sleek black desks stretched across the room, filled with some of the most brilliant software engineers, forensic accountants, and data scientists in the country. Large digital monitors lined the walls, displaying real-time financial algorithms, market fluctuations, and security protocol updates in endless streams of glowing green and blue data. This was my empire. I built this massive machine to hunt down financial predators, and today, its crosshairs were locking directly onto my own brother. I walked briskly past the glass-walled conference rooms toward the central server hub, where my lead data architect Cameron was monitoring the primary audit feeds. Cameron was a brilliant cybersecurity expert who had helped me design our flagship tracking software. He looked up from his multi-monitor workstation as I approached, immediately sensing the shift in my demeanor. I did not waste time with pleasantries. I leaned over his desk, my voice low and completely devoid of warmth. I need you to initiate a shadow audit, I instructed. I want a full, unrestrained, deep dive into a specific target. Run his social security number, his banking credentials, his corporate email servers, and his digital footprint across all encrypted networks. Do not leave a single stone unturned. Cameron raised an eyebrow but did not hesitate. He pulled up a secure search terminal. Who is the target, Jason? I replied, handing him a slip of paper with my brother's full legal name, date of birth, and his employee identification number at the bank. I want to see everything he has touched in the last 12 months. Cameron's fingers flew across his keyboard, launching our proprietary tracking algorithm. The software was designed to bypass superficial financial facades and dig straight into the underlying metadata of corporate transactions. It searched for hidden liabilities, offshore wire transfers, and digital breadcrumbs that traditional bank auditors always missed. I stood behind Cameron, crossing my arms as lines of code began rapidly scrolling across his screens. We were about to strip away the illusion of the wealthy bank credit director and expose the desperate fraud hiding underneath. For the first 20 minutes, the data merely confirmed what I already knew. Jason was drowning in personal debt. We watched as the algorithm mapped out his maxed-out credit lines, his high-interest personal loans, and the recent highly illegal secondary mortgage he had secured using my stolen suburban house equity. The sheer volume of his financial mismanagement was staggering, but it was just standard incompetence. It was not enough to trigger the level of destruction I required. I needed something explosive. I needed something terminal. Keep digging into his professional network, I commanded, my eyes narrowing at the screen. Look at his outbound data transfers from his bank terminal. Where is he sending information? Cameron adjusted his search parameters, focusing the algorithm exclusively on Jason's corporate server activity. Suddenly, the screen flashed with a series of bright red warnings. An anomaly had triggered our security filters. Cameron frowned, leaning closer to his monitors. This is strange, he muttered, tracing a complex line of digital traffic. Your brother has been initiating massive data downloads late at night, usually between 2 and 4 in the morning. But he is not pulling data from his own bank. He is actively routing his connection through a masked proxy server to access an entirely different corporate network. My pulse quickened with predatory anticipation. Can you identify the external network, I asked? Cameron ran a decryption sequence on the proxy. A few seconds later, the logo and server identification of a prominent commercial real estate investment firm appeared on the screen. My breath caught in my throat. It was a high-net-worth real estate firm based right here in Chicago. I knew their network architecture intimately because 2 years ago they had hired me as an independent consultant to audit their cybersecurity protocols. I had provided them with a massive report detailing a critical vulnerability in their client database firewall, warning them that a sophisticated hacker could exploit it to extract proprietary financial records. They had apparently ignored my warning and failed to patch the vulnerability. Now, my brother was actively exploiting that exact digital backdoor. What exactly is he downloading? I asked, leaning in so close my breath fogged the edge of Cameron's monitor. Cameron initiated a packet trace on the stolen data. The results were immediate and horrifying. He is pulling down their proprietary client lists. Cameron explained, his voice laced with shock. These are highly confidential files containing the social security numbers, unlisted property portfolios, and liquid asset verifications of incredibly wealthy investors. This is heavily restricted data. He is pulling gigabytes of it straight onto an unsecured external hard drive. The cold realization hit me like a physical strike. Jason was not just a manipulative brother stealing from his parents to buy a mansion. He was an active corporate spy. He was stealing highly classified proprietary financial data from a rival real estate firm. The motive was blazingly obvious. Jason was drowning in millions of dollars of fraudulent debt. He was stealing these elite client lists to either sell them on the black market for a massive cash payout or to illegally leverage their identities to secure further fraudulent loans for his own failing accounts. This changed everything. The entire landscape of the battlefield had just shifted beneath my feet. An hour ago, I was dealing with a toxic narcissistic brother who had stolen my personal property equity. That was a family dispute masking a local fraud issue. But this new discovery elevated the situation into a completely different stratosphere. Stealing proprietary financial data across state lines using a corporate banking terminal was not a minor offense. It was corporate espionage. It was identity theft on a massive scale. This was a severe federal crime carrying decades of mandatory prison time. I stared at the blinking red data packets on Cameron's screen, feeling a terrifying absolute calm wash over my entire body. My family had demanded I respect Jason because he was a powerful executive. They had demanded I sacrifice my own housing to protect his prestigious legacy. They had laughed at my expense, mocked my career, and treated me like disposable trash to prop up a man they believed was a titan of industry. They had built their entire worldview around the illusion of his superiority. Cameron looked up at me clearly, waiting for orders. "Do we block the proxy?" he asked quietly. "Do we alert the real estate firm?" "No," I replied, my voice dropping to a sharp, lethal whisper. "If we alert them now, he might have time to destroy the hard drives and cover his tracks." We let him keep downloading. We let him gather enough stolen data to ensure the federal sentencing guidelines lock him away for the rest of his natural life. I stepped back from the workstation, adjusting the cuffs of my suit jacket. The stakes had officially moved beyond petty family revenge. This was no longer about teaching them a lesson or forcing them to apologize. There would be no apologies. There would be no reconciliation. I was going to hand my brother over to the federal government on a silver platter, and I was going to make sure my parents watched him fall. I pulled out my phone and dialed the private number of my ruthless corporate lawyer, David. It was time to prepare the execution. David answered on the second ring. His voice was gravelly and sharp, the tone of a man who thrived on high-stakes corporate warfare. At 45 years old, David was widely considered one of the most ruthless and effective corporate attorneys in Chicago. He did not handle petty family disputes or minor civil infractions. He dismantled monopolies, orchestrated hostile takeovers, and buried financial criminals under mountains of undeniable litigation. I bypassed any polite greetings and simply told him to open the encrypted secure portal I had just shared with his private server. I sat in my office, watching the digital clock on my monitor tick by as David silently reviewed the data packets Cameron had extracted. For 5 minutes, the line was completely quiet, save for the sound of David clicking through the files. I knew exactly what he was looking at. He was viewing the secondary mortgage documents bearing my parents' forged income statements. He was analyzing the proxy server logs that proved Jason was actively siphoning proprietary client data from a rival real estate firm. He was staring at multiple counts of federal wire fraud, identity theft, and corporate espionage. Finally, David let out a low, sustained breath. "Clara," he said, his tone dead serious, "I need you to understand exactly what you have just uncovered. Your brother is not just stealing from your parents to fund a lifestyle. He is committing massive systemic federal crimes using his bank network infrastructure." "I am fully aware of the severity, David," I replied, my voice perfectly steady. "I want him held accountable. I want every single asset he possesses frozen, and I want the authorities handed a completely waterproof case." David paused, the calculating gears in his head, turning audibly over the phone line. Taking down a sitting credit director at a major financial institution is going to be a bloodbath, Clara. Banks do not like bad press. They will unleash an army of crisis management lawyers to protect their stock prices. They might try to sweep this under the rug, quietly terminate him, and pay off the victims with non-disclosure agreements just to avoid federal scrutiny. If you initiate a standard lawsuit or simply hand this to the local police, his bank will throw millions of dollars into suppressing the fallout. They will bury us in endless litigation, and Jason might actually negotiate a quiet exit with no prison time. It will be a brutal, expensive, and incredibly exhausting war of attrition. Are you absolutely certain you want to proceed? I did not flinch. I stood by the glass windows of my office looking out at the city that my family thought I was failing in. They thought I was weak. They thought I would quietly accept being pushed into a plastic folding chair by the kitchen trash cans. They thought they could leverage my property and demand my eviction while laughing in my face. I do not want a standard lawsuit, David, I stated, my voice dropping to a glacial, uncompromising chill. I do not want to fight his bank. I want to own the battlefield before he even realizes a war has started. Tell me, David, who audits his bank, who handles their external regulatory compliance. I heard the sound of a keyboard clacking rapidly on David's end. A few moments later, he responded. They use an independent regulatory firm called Vanguard Financial Compliance. They are a mid-sized auditing group based here in the city. They hold the federal authority to report directly to the Securities and Exchange Commission if they detect any internal anomalies within the bank. A sharp, predatory smile touched the corners of my mouth. How much is Vanguard currently valued at? I asked. David hesitated for a fraction of a second, quickly realizing the sheer scale of the chess move I was contemplating. Their current market valuation is roughly $40 million. Clara, what are you suggesting? I want them, I commanded, stepping away from the window and walking back to my desk. I want you to draft an aggressive, immediate acquisition proposal. I am authorizing my company to buy Vanguard Financial Compliance outright. Offer them $50 million in a hostile cash buyout. Make it an exploding offer. They have 48 hours to accept the terms, or I will use my proprietary software to instantly render their entire auditing methodology obsolete and run them entirely out of business. A low chuckle escaped David. You want to buy the auditing firm that oversees your brother's bank? You want to become his ultimate regulatory authority? Exactly, I confirmed, my tone laced with absolute certainty. If we just hand the evidence to the bank, they will try to cover for him. But if my newly acquired firm initiates an independent federally mandated audit, the bank's executives will have absolutely no choice but to comply. They will not be able to sweep his crimes under the rug because I will be the one holding the broom. I will personally control the compliance report that gets handed directly to the federal authorities. I want to trap Jason in a corner where not even his powerful corporate bosses can save him. I authorized the release of capital from our corporate reserves before David even hung up the phone. $50 million was a massive expenditure, but my firm generated that kind of revenue in a single fiscal quarter. It was an investment that would not only destroy Jason, but also grant my financial technology empire a massive strategic foothold in the traditional banking sector. The irony was exquisite. My mother had just mocked my career, utterly convinced I was a penniless disappointment, while I casually authorized a $50 million acquisition simply to orchestrate her golden child's downfall. Consider the acquisition paperwork drafted, David said, his voice brimming with professional excitement. I will mobilize the mergers and acquisitions team immediately. We will lock down the Vanguard buyout by the end of the week. Your brother has absolutely no idea what kind of monster he just woke up. I ended the call and sat down in my leather executive chair. The pieces were officially in motion. My family thought they had successfully outsmarted me. Jason thought he was securing his opulent future by stealing my equity and selling restricted data to fund his $3 million mansion. He thought his position as a bank director made him untouchable. He was profoundly mistaken. By next week, my company would finalize the hostile takeover of Vanguard Financial Compliance. Without his knowledge, I would effectively become his ultimate superior. I would have full legal and federal jurisdiction to review every single loan he approved, every proxy server he accessed, and every fraudulent document he submitted. I was not just going to ruin his housewarming party. I was going to construct a flawless, inescapable federal cage, and I was going to lock the door myself. 72 hours later, the acquisition of Vanguard Financial Compliance was complete. David executed the hostile buyout with the precision of a military strike. The partners at Vanguard took the $50 million cash offer without a second thought, completely unaware they were handing over the keys to my brother's destruction. By Friday morning, a secure encrypted hard drive containing Vanguard's complete unrestricted audit logs was delivered directly to my private office. I reserved our most secure glass-walled conference room. The glass frosted over at the press of a button blocking the outside world. David walked in carrying 2 cups of black coffee and a fresh legal pad. He sat across from me as I plugged the drive into the isolated terminal. The screen hummed to life, projecting millions of lines of raw financial data onto the massive wall monitor. "We have federal clearance to review every single transaction processed by Jason's credit division over the last 5 years," I stated. I pulled up the search parameters and locked the algorithm onto Jason's employee identification number. "Let us see what the golden child has been hiding in the dark," David murmured, taking a sip of his coffee. I initiated the deep forensic scan. The software required only 4 minutes to sift through the heavily guarded bank servers. When the results populated on the screen, the sheer magnitude of the financial carnage left even David speechless for a moment. It was not just a few bad loans or a minor ethical breach. We were looking at a massive, intricate web of blatant wire fraud and mortgage fraud. Jason was completely drowning in debt. The facade of the wealthy, successful bank executive was nothing but an elaborate shell game. He had maxed out every legitimate line of credit he possessed years ago. To maintain his lavish lifestyle, he had begun manipulating the internal lending protocols of his own employer. "Look at these income verification documents," I said, pointing to a cluster of highlighted PDF files. I expanded the images on the monitor. They were tax returns and asset declarations belonging to William and Beatrice. David leaned forward, his eyes scanning the numbers. He whistled softly. "Your parents do not make this kind of money, not even close. According to this paperwork, your father is pulling in 7 figures annually from consulting fees. He is retired and living on a modest pension," I replied coldly. Jason forged their income documents. He inflated their net worth by roughly 800% to make them appear as ultra-high net worth guarantors. He used these forged documents to co-sign a barrage of secondary loans. And because he is the credit director, David added, piecing the puzzle together, he personally bypassed the standard underwriting process. He effectively approved his own fraudulent loan applications using his administrative overrides. I clicked through the digital paper trail tracing the flow of stolen capital. The stolen equity from my suburban house was just the tip of the iceberg. Jason had orchestrated a multi-million-dollar illusion specifically to purchase the $3 million mansion. He needed the estate to secure Naomi. He needed the zip code to impress her prominent Atlanta family. He was terrified of looking like a failure, so he committed multiple federal felonies to buy a throne he could not afford. "Here is the primary mortgage for the new mansion," I said, bringing up the closing documents from last month. He secured a massive jumbo loan. But look at the liquidity verification. He transferred funds from the stolen equity on my house into his primary checking account, took a digital snapshot to prove liquid reserves to the private lender, and then immediately wired that same money to cover delinquent payments on 3 separate secret credit accounts. "It is classic check kiting," David observed, taking rapid notes on his legal pad. "He is moving invisible money in circles to satisfy automated banking triggers. The minute the music stops, the entire structure collapses." I continued pulling up file after file. We found evidence of Jason illegally accessing restricted accounts. We found the proxy server logs confirming his corporate espionage against the rival real estate firm. Every single document was a nail in his coffin. He had committed identity theft against his own parents, wire fraud across state lines, and severe embezzlement from his employer. He did all of this just to maintain the golden child narrative, I stated, feeling a profound sense of disgust. William and Beatrice practically worshipped the ground he walked on because he projected the exact image of wealth they craved. They tore me down and called me a disappointment because my quiet success did not give them anything to brag about at their country club. Meanwhile, their perfect son was actively destroying their financial future to buy sports cars and caviar. If William and Beatrice signed any of these guarantor documents, even in ignorance, they are legally liable for the fraudulent debt, David warned. When the federal agents freeze Jason's assets, the banks will immediately go after your parents to recoup the losses. They will lose everything. I looked at the screen, remembering how Beatrice had laughed at me while I sat by the trash cans. I remembered William calling me a disgrace. I remembered how eagerly they had mortgaged my house to hand the cash to my abuser. They made their bed. I replied, my voice devoid of any pity. Now they get to sleep in it. David closed his legal pad and looked at me. We have enough evidence right here to hand him over to the federal authorities and guarantee a 20-year prison sentence. I can draft the compliance report and submit it to the Securities and Exchange Commission this afternoon. The FBI will have him in handcuffs by tomorrow morning. I shook my head slowly. No. Not yet. David frowned. Clara, you cannot sit on this. As the owner of Vanguard Financial Compliance, you have a legal obligation to report this. I am going to report it, I assured him. But I'm going to control the timing of the detonation. Jason just sent me a 30-day eviction notice. He thinks he is selling my house to cover his fraudulent tracks. He thinks he is hosting a high-society housewarming party at that $3 million mansion next weekend. I want him to feel the absolute height of his fake power before I pull the rug out from under him. I turned back to the massive monitor, my eyes locking onto the primary lien holder for Jason's $3 million mortgage. The private lending firm was a notorious aggressive group that specialized in high-risk loans. David, I said, my tone shifting into pure tactical command. Contact this private lender. They already know Jason missed his first massive payment because he had to divert the stolen equity to his credit cards. They know this loan is toxic. I want you to buy his mansion's debt. Purchase the paper entirely through one of our anonymous shell companies. David smiled, a cold, calculating grin spreading across his face. You want to become his landlord. I want to become his executioner, I corrected. Buy the debt. Initiate the default protocols immediately. By the time his housewarming party starts, I want to legally own the roof over his head. Consider it done, David said, standing up. I remained in the conference room alone, surrounded by the glowing digital proof of my brother's impending ruin. The evidence was secured. The trap was reinforced with federal steel. The golden child had dug his own grave, and I was holding the shovel. The following Tuesday morning, David walked back into my office holding a thick manila folder. He dropped it onto my glass desk with a heavy, satisfying thud. The lender was eager to offload the liability, David said, adjusting his suit jacket as he took a seat across from me. Jason had secured his $3 million mortgage through Apex Capital Funding. They were a notorious aggressive private lending firm that catered to high-risk borrowers who needed fast cash without the strict oversight of traditional banks. Apex did not care about Jason's fabricated income or his inflated net worth. They only cared about the massive interest rates and the collateral. But Jason had already missed his first massive payment. He had bounced 2 consecutive wire transfers trying to cover the astronomical monthly premium because he had diverted the stolen equity from my house to pay off his other maxed-out credit accounts. The lender's automated systems had already flagged his account as a high-risk default. I opened the folder. Inside were the assignment of mortgage documents and the promissory notes. I had instructed David to utilize one of my corporate shell companies, a holding entity named Obsidian Asset Management. The name was completely untraceable to me personally. Obsidian existed on paper solely to absorb and restructure toxic corporate debt during our acquisitions. Apex Capital executives were absolutely thrilled when Obsidian offered to purchase Jason's defaulting loan at a slight premium to avoid the lengthy legal headache of a contested foreclosure process. They transferred the paper yesterday afternoon, David explained, pointing to the final signature page. The transfer of the deed of trust is officially recorded. Clara, you now legally own the debt on your brother's $3 million mansion. You are the sole lien holder. I ran my fingers over the crisp legal documents. The weight of the paper felt like absolute victory. Jason had built his entire identity around this extravagant estate. He had moved Naomi into the sprawling property, hired elite decorators, and begun parading his newfound status to his wealthy colleagues. He believed he was an untouchable titan of industry living in a fortress of his own making. He had no idea that his fortress was built on quicksand, and I had just bought the quicksand. Because Jason had already defaulted on his initial payments, The legal parameters of the mortgage allowed the lien holder to initiate immediate acceleration of the debt. The standard grace periods did not apply to his specific high-risk private loan. David had meticulously verified the clauses. By transferring the debt to my shell company, we had inherited the right to trigger the default protocols the moment the ink dried. Have we initiated the pre-foreclosure status? I asked, closing the folder and looking up at David. The gears of the legal machine needed to lock firmly into place. David smiled a sharp, predatory expression. The notice of default was filed with the county recorder at 8 o'clock this morning. Legally, the property is now in active pre-foreclosure. Because the loan was obtained through documented federal wire fraud and forged income statements, the standard consumer protections are completely void. He breached the morality and legality clauses of the promissory note. We can demand the immediate total repayment of the $3 million principal. And since he cannot pay it, I added my voice calm and measured. He does not have $3 million in cash. He does not even have $3,000 in available credit. Exactly, David confirmed. Since he cannot satisfy the accelerated debt demand, Obsidian Asset Management has the legal authority to execute a non-judicial foreclosure. We can seize the asset. You literally hold the keys to his front door. I leaned back in my executive chair. The power dynamic had completely inverted. For 33 years, my family had dictated my worth. They had isolated me, mocked my ambitions, and treated me like a disposable financial host. William and Beatrice had enabled Jason's arrogance, sacrificing my security to build his illusion. Just a few nights ago, Jason had demanded I pay a $5,000 restaurant bill to humiliate me in public. He had ordered my eviction from the modest suburban house I had paid for with my own blood and sweat. He thought he possessed the authority to cast me out onto the street. Now I held the absolute legal right to evict him from his $3 million dream home. I was no longer the scapegoat sitting by the kitchen trash cans. I was the architect of his total ruin. The irony was exquisite. He had stolen my equity to buy a house that I now legally controlled. Send the formal notice of acceleration to his primary residence, I instructed, but bury it in standard corporate jargon. Send it from Obsidian Asset Management in a plain white envelope. He is so arrogant, he probably will not even read the fine print. He will think it is just a routine administrative transfer from his original lender notifying him of a new payment portal. I want him to feel completely safe and secure right up until the very last second. David nodded, packing up his briefcase. I will have the compliance team handle the mailings. He will remain completely blind to your involvement. We also have the finalized federal audit reports, ready to submit to the authorities whenever you give the word. The corporate espionage and wire fraud charges are fully documented and ready for the federal agents. Hold the federal audit for now, I ordered. We need to time this perfectly. Jason is hosting his elite housewarming party this weekend. He is inviting the senior executives from his bank, Naomi's prominent family from Atlanta, and the highest tiers of Chicago society. He wants an audience to witness his fake coronation. I stood up from my desk, picking up the manila folder containing the deed to my brother's mansion. I am going to let him have his audience, I said softly. The following afternoon, my executive assistant knocked gently on the frosted glass door of my office. She walked in carrying a silver tray that held a single piece of mail. It was a massive envelope crafted from thick, textured cream paper, sealed with an elaborate wax stamp bearing the newly minted initials of my brother and his wife. The sheer weight of the envelope was designed to communicate wealth and status before it was even opened. My assistant raised an eyebrow as she handed it to me, clearly amused by the excessive presentation. I slid a silver letter opener under the wax seal and pulled out the contents. The invitation inside was a masterclass in performative luxury. It was printed on heavy gold foil cardstock with ornate custom calligraphy. The text proudly announced a dual celebration: a highly exclusive black tie optional housewarming and baby shower at the new estate. The event promised catered champagne towers, a live jazz ensemble, and a private tour of the $3 million grounds. It was designed to function as a royal debut for Jason and Naomi into the upper echelons of Chicago high society. A small separate card slipped out from between the heavy layers of the invitation and fluttered onto my glass desk. I picked it up. It was a handwritten note, penned in Naomi's elegant sloping cursive. I read the words slowly, letting the incredible condescension wash over me. Clara, the note began, completely bypassing any familial warmth. Jason was hesitant to include you after the unfortunate incident at the restaurant. However, I believe family should extend grace. You should come to the estate this weekend. It is a good opportunity for you to see how successful people live. Perhaps witnessing what hard work and proper financial planning can achieve will give you the motivation you need to finally improve your own situation. Please dress appropriately. Naomi. I stared at the handwritten card, a genuine, terrifying smirk spreading across my face. The absolute staggering irony of her words echoed in the quiet space of my office. Naomi genuinely believed she was throwing a lifeline to a struggling, impoverished woman. She truly believed her husband was a self-made titan of finance who had built an empire through hard work and proper planning. She thought she was being magnanimous by allowing the family failure to step inside their lavish fortress for a few hours. She had no idea that the fortress did not belong to them. She did not know that the very walls she planned to show off were currently legally owned by the woman holding her condescending note. She was entirely unaware that the champagne she planned to serve was bought with stolen equity, that the mortgage was secured through federal wire fraud, and that her husband was an active corporate spy. Naomi was a proud African-American woman from a distinguished family of Atlanta judges and attorneys. Her family had fought hard for every ounce of their prestige, breaking through generational barriers with sheer intellect and unimpeachable ethics. They valued integrity, reputation, and lawful success above all else. Jason knew this, which was exactly why he had built such a monumental lie to trap her. He was parading her around in a stolen life, using her pristine reputation to launder his own image. When Naomi's father and brothers discovered that Jason had forged her signature on federal loan documents legally tying her to his embezzlement, they would not just be angry, they would destroy him in court. The fact that she had taken the time to write this patronizing note proved just how deeply she had swallowed his toxic narrative. She thought I was the villain. She thought I was the jealous, lazy sister trying to tear down a great man. I felt a fleeting sense of sorrow for the devastation she was about to endure, but I knew that exposing the truth was the only way to free her from a man who was actively destroying her future. I placed the gold foil invitation and the handwritten note carefully next to the legal foreclosure documents sitting on my desk. The visual contrast between the two pieces of paper was absolute perfection. On the left lay the arrogant, glittering illusion of Jason's success. On the right lay the cold, hard legal reality of his impending destruction. My phone buzzed with an incoming call from David. I answered immediately. I just received confirmation from the Federal Compliance Division. David reported, his voice crisp and professional. The Securities and Exchange Commission agents have quietly reviewed the preliminary data packets we forwarded through our new auditing acquisition. They are highly motivated. Given the scale of the corporate espionage and the blatant mortgage fraud, they have fast-tracked the investigation. Federal warrants are being prepared as we speak. Excellent, I replied, picking up the gold foil invitation. Tell the federal agents that they do not need to hunt Jason down at the bank. Tell them he is hosting a massive public gathering this Saturday afternoon. He will be surrounded by his senior bank executives, his wealthy neighbors, and his entire extended family. It is the perfect environment for an arrest. David chuckled darkly. You are going to let the authorities raid his housewarming party. It is not his house, I reminded him, my voice devoid of any mercy. And yes, I am going to let them raid it. He wants an audience to witness his success. I am simply ensuring that the same audience witnesses his downfall. He built this stage himself. He invited the spectators. I am just going to provide the grand finale. I ended the call and opened my personal email. I navigated to the digital RSVP link printed at the bottom of Naomi's extravagant invitation. I clicked the button to confirm my attendance. I filled out the dietary restrictions section with a polite, innocuous request. playing the role of the submissive, grateful sister perfectly. I wanted them to believe they had won. I wanted Jason to see my RSVP and feel a surge of narcissistic triumph, fully convinced that I was crawling back to beg for his scraps and marvel at his stolen wealth. I stood up and walked over to the closet in my office where I kept my emergency corporate wardrobe. I bypassed the standard business dresses and pulled out a custom-tailored razor-sharp power suit. It was a striking shade of deep emerald green, constructed from Italian wool, exuding absolute authority and lethal confidence. It was the exact opposite of what a struggling, impoverished office worker would wear. It was the armor of a chief executive officer stepping onto the battlefield to execute a hostile takeover. My family had spent 33 years trying to break my spirit. They had stolen my money, mocked my ambitions, and demanded my eviction. Now they were inviting me to their own execution, completely blind to the guillotine hanging directly over their heads. The stage for their destruction had been set entirely by their own arrogance. All I had to do was show up, smile, and watch the entire illusion burn to ash. The conference room table was covered in crisp white legal documents. I sat at the head of the glass table, flanked by David and two of my senior compliance officers. We were not merely preparing for a lawsuit. We were assembling an airtight federal execution. I picked up the first stack of papers. It was the formal notice of default and foreclosure from Obsidian Asset Management. I read through the heavy legal jargon, my eyes scanning the specific acceleration clauses we had triggered. Jason had missed his payments, and because the loan was secured through documented wire fraud, every single consumer protection statute had been instantly voided. The document stated in clear, undeniable terms that the $3 million property was now legally forfeit. Next to the foreclosure notice lay the eviction mandate. David had expedited the order through a private judicial channel using the criminal fraud evidence as leverage. Once the federal agents raided the house and took Jason into custody, the property would immediately revert to my control. Jason, Naomi, and my parents would have exactly 30 minutes to remove their personal belongings from the premises before private security changed the locks. I traced my finger over the official county seal stamped at the bottom of the page. My brother had called me a failure and demanded I pack my bags. Now his own eviction order was resting under my fingertips, fully authorized and ready to be served on a silver platter. The centerpiece of the table, however, was the federal fraud dossier. It was a massive 3-inch thick binder bound in black leather. I opened it and flipped through the meticulously organized tabs. Section A contained the proxy server logs proving Jason had committed corporate espionage by stealing proprietary data from the rival real estate firm. Section B held the falsified loan applications displaying William and Beatrice's grotesquely inflated income statements. Section C was the most devastating. It contained the undeniable proof that Jason had forged Naomi's signature on secondary liability agreements. He had legally tethered his pregnant wife to his massive embezzlement scheme without her knowledge, effectively destroying her pristine financial standing to buy himself a few months of luxury. "This is a masterpiece," David said, leaning back in his chair and tapping his gold pen against the table. "The investigators have already reviewed the digital copies we provided through Vanguard. They coordinated with the local field office this morning. The arrest warrants are signed by a federal judge. The agents are fully briefed and standing by. They are just waiting for you to give the green light." I closed the heavy black binder. "The green light will be given on Saturday afternoon," I stated, my voice echoing in the quiet conference room. "I want them to breach the gates right in the middle of his extravagant champagne toast. I want every single guest in that mansion to see exactly what happens to a man who steals from his own family to build a fake throne." David smirked, but then his expression turned serious. "If you want maximum psychological impact, we need to ensure the right audience is present. Jason invited a massive crowd, but we need the heavy hitters there. We need the people who can instantly dismantle his professional life the moment the handcuffs go on." I smiled, a slow, calculated expression. "I am already 10 steps ahead of you, David. Jason wants to impress high society, but his ultimate goal is to dazzle the senior executives at his bank. He desperately wants a promotion to senior vice president, and he thinks hosting this lavish party will prove he belongs in the elite inner circle. I turned to my computer and opened a secure communication channel. 2 days ago, immediately after finalizing the hostile takeover of Vanguard Financial Compliance, I instructed my executive team to send a highly confidential encrypted memo to the current senior vice president of Jason's bank. The memo politely introduced my firm as the new absolute regulatory authority overseeing their branch. I then casually mentioned that I would be attending a private social gathering in the suburbs this coming weekend, and I suggested it might be an excellent informal opportunity for our two companies to discuss future compliance strategies over drinks. I made it sound like an exclusive invite-only networking opportunity that a smart executive could not afford to miss. I did not explicitly name Jason in the memo, but I provided the exact address and time of the housewarming party. The senior vice president, eager to appease the new regulatory watchdog that held the power to audit his entire institution, immediately took the bait. I clicked open my inbox and turned the monitor so David could see the screen. Displayed in bright bold text was a confirmed RSVP directly from the senior vice president's executive assistant. The executive was not just attending. He was bringing two other senior board members with him, completely unaware that they were walking into a federal raid. David let out a sharp laugh of disbelief. "You lured his boss to the party using your newly acquired auditing firm as leverage. Jason is going to think his boss showed up because he respects him. He is going to think he finally made it into the boys' club." "Yes," I replied, locking my computer screen. "Jason will spend the first hour of that party practically kissing the ground his boss walks on. He will parade Naomi around, show off his stolen marble countertops, and act like the king of the world. And then right when he feels completely untouchable, I am going to hand that thick black binder directly to his boss. I'm going to let the senior executive read the undeniable proof of Jason's embezzlement right there in the living room." The trap was completely sealed. Every single exit was blocked by a wall of federal steel and undeniable corporate power. My family had spent my entire life controlling the narrative. They had dictated who was successful and who was a failure. They had silenced me, stolen from me, and demanded my gratitude for the privilege of being abused. But they had absolutely no idea how the real world operated. They did not understand that real power does not scream in a restaurant or brag about fake wealth. Real power sits quietly in a glass office, purchasing your debt and orchestrating your absolute ruin with a few keystrokes. I stood up from the conference table and gathered the physical documents: the foreclosure notice, the eviction mandate, and the heavy black dossier of federal crimes. I placed them carefully into my leather briefcase. The paper felt heavy, loaded with the weight of 33 years of suppressed anger and cold, calculated justice. I looked at David. "Enjoy your Friday evening," I told him. "Get some rest. Tomorrow we are going to burn a fake empire to the ground." Saturday morning arrived with heavy, overcast skies, a fitting backdrop for the absolute destruction I was about to unleash. I woke up precisely at 6 without the need for an alarm clock. There was no anxiety in my chest and no lingering guilt about what I prepared to do. The girl who used to cry alone in her bedroom when Jason mocked her grades was completely dead. In her place was a machine fueled by cold logic and undeniable corporate power. I moved through my penthouse with deliberate purpose. I poured a single cup of black coffee and stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the massive city of Chicago wake up below me. Today was not a day for hesitation or forgiveness. It was a day for a calculated execution. I finished my coffee, set the mug on the granite counter, and walked into my closet. I bypassed the rows of muted businesswear. My hand went directly to the black garment bag hanging at the end of the rack. I unzipped the protective bag and pulled out the custom-tailored emerald green power suit. I commissioned this striking outfit from a tailor in Milan months ago, long before Jason threw that $5,000 restaurant bill into my lap. I designed it for ruthless boardrooms, crafted from heavy Italian wool that held its razor-sharp structure perfectly. I slipped into the trousers and buttoned the structured jacket over a crisp black silk blouse. The fit was impeccable, clinging to my frame like a suit of modern armor. I stepped into black stiletto heels that echoed sharply against the polished hardwood floor of my apartment. I walked over to the full-length mirror and stared directly at my reflection. I searched my eyes for any lingering trace of the frightened younger sister who used to let her mother dictate her worth and silence her voice. There was absolutely nothing there. Beatrice and William spent 33 years trying to mold me into a submissive failure so their golden child could shine brighter by comparison. They illegally stole my property. Equity mocked my existence and demanded my immediate eviction, convinced I would simply roll over and absorb the abuse. The woman staring back at me in the mirror was a complete stranger to them. She was a lethal chief executive officer currently holding a loaded federal weapon. I reached for my jewelry box and clasped a heavy gold watch around my wrist. It was a subtle but aggressive display of the massive wealth I built entirely without their help. My cell phone buzzed against the marble vanity counter, shattering the quiet morning silence. It was David. I picked up the device and answered, my eyes never leaving my reflection in the mirror. "The package has been delivered," David stated, his voice tight with professional anticipation. "I personally handed the wire fraud dossiers, the forged mortgage applications, and the corporate espionage proxy logs directly to the federal field office at 8 o'clock this morning. They immediately cross-referenced our proprietary data with their preliminary security scans. The federal arrest warrants have been executed and signed by a federal judge." I looked down at my gold watch. It was exactly 10 in the morning. Jason and his extravagant housewarming party was scheduled to begin at 1 in the afternoon. "Are the federal agents currently positioned?" I asked, my tone utterly devoid of mercy. "They have a staging area set up 3 blocks away from the mansion perimeter," David confirmed. "They are utilizing 2 unmarked federal vehicles and a police escort to avoid raising suspicion in the affluent neighborhood. They are actively monitoring the guest arrivals through secure channels. They want to hit the property when maximum capacity is reached to ensure Jason cannot flee the scene or destroy any encrypted digital devices inside the house." The commanding agent confirmed they will breach the front doors at precisely 2:30 this afternoon. "You have exactly 90 minutes inside that house to corner him and present your evidence before the authorities kick the doors in and take him away." "Excellent," I replied, reaching down and picking up my heavy black leather briefcase containing the active foreclosure notice and the immediate eviction mandate. "Let Jason pop his expensive champagne. Let him shake hands with his boss and parade his pregnant wife around." "I will see you on Monday, David." I hung up the phone and slid it into my pocket. I gripped the handle of the leather briefcase, feeling the physical embodiment of my absolute authority over Jason and his stolen life resting in my palm. I walked out of my penthouse, locked the door, and took the private elevator directly down to the secure underground parking garage. My chauffeur was already standing at attention beside the idling black Maybach, holding the rear door open. He nodded respectfully as I slid into the plush, pristine leather interior. I placed the briefcase on the seat beside me and rested my hand flat on top of it, securing the documents that would soon destroy a fake empire. "Take me to the suburbs," I instructed my driver, providing the exact address of the $3 million estate that I now legally owned. The sprawling property was less than an hour away, yet it felt like the final destination of a 33-year journey. The soundproof privacy partition glided up smoothly, sealing me in absolute perfect silence. As the Maybach pulled out onto the busy highway, heading steadily toward the affluent neighborhood where my brother was currently parading around in his fraudulent kingdom, I felt my heart rate slow to a steady rhythmic beat. I was not a victim seeking a meaningless apology. I was the terrifying consequence of their own toxic greed driving straight into the heart of their grand illusion. I leaned my head back against the comfortable headrest, closed my eyes, and took one final deep breath. I was completely ready for this war. The tires of the Maybach crunched against the pristine white gravel of the circular driveway. We arrived at the gates of the $3 million estate. The property was a grotesque monument to stolen equity. Towering stone columns flanked the entrance, leading to a manicured lawn. Luxury vehicles were parked along the street, ranging from sports cars to sleek sedans. Jason had spared absolutely no expense in staging this massive housewarming to impress his new social circle. He hired a small army of valet attendants to manage the arrivals seamlessly. A valet rushed forward to open my door the moment the Maybach halted. I stepped out onto the driveway, my stiletto heels sinking slightly into the gravel. I adjusted the lapels of my emerald green power suit and gripped the leather briefcase tightly. The air was filled with the sound of a live jazz ensemble playing on the patio, mingling with the clinking of crystal glasses. I bypassed the main doors, which were thrown wide open to reveal a cascading chandelier, and walked directly toward the side path, leading to the expansive backyard. The lawn was packed with Chicago elite. Caterers in matching black uniforms circulated with silver trays, holding vintage champagne and hors d'oeuvres. I scanned the crowd, instantly recognizing several high-ranking bank executives standing near the infinity pool. They wore expensive tailoring and laughed at jokes made by younger associates. Near the lavishly decorated baby shower gift table stood Naomi's prestigious family, who had flown in from Atlanta. They radiated generational dignity and quiet sophistication. Naomi's father, a prominent federal judge, was deep in conversation with a local politician. Her mother and two brothers stood nearby holding elegant gift bags wrapped in silk ribbons. They looked completely at ease in this environment, unaware that their daughter was legally tethered to a man who forged her signature to steal millions. They genuinely believed Jason was a brilliant financial director, providing an incredible life for their pregnant daughter. The sheer scale of the illusion was breathtaking. Jason was moving through the crowd like a conquering king. He held a glass of scotch in one hand and gestured wildly as he recounted some fabricated story to junior loan officers. He wore a designer linen suit projecting the exact image of relaxed, effortless wealth. My mother Beatrice hovered a few feet away, holding court with wealthy neighborhood wives. She was wearing a new diamond necklace and a silk dress that cost more than my college tuition. She laughed loudly, pointing out the custom landscaping features and taking absolute credit for Jason's magnificent success. I walked onto the edge of the stone patio. I did not try to hide or blend in with the catering staff. I stood in the direct line of sight between the jazz band and the outdoor bar, waiting for the inevitable collision. It took exactly 45 seconds for the illusion to shatter. Beatrice saw me first. Her champagne flute stopped halfway to her mouth. Her eyes widened in absolute horror as she took in my appearance. She expected the pathetic, desperate girl who sat by the trash cans last night. She did not expect a woman radiating lethal corporate authority holding a heavy leather briefcase. Beatrice immediately grabbed Jason's arm, her manicured fingernails digging into his linen suit jacket. She pointed frantically in my direction. Jason turned his head, annoyed by the interruption. The moment his eyes locked onto mine, the smug, arrogant smile melted completely off his face. His skin flushed a deep, violent shade of crimson. He slammed his scotch glass down onto a nearby cocktail table so hard the amber liquid sloshed over the rim. He did not care that he was standing in the middle of a high society gathering. His toxic rage completely overrode his desperate need to maintain his public image. He shoved his way past two junior bank executives, muttering a sharp excuse, and stormed directly across the patio toward me. His fists were clenched tight at his sides, his chest heaving with fury. He closed the distance between us in seconds, stopping less than 2 feet away from my face. "Who let you in?" He snarled, his voice a venomous hiss that carried over the sound of the jazz band. "Get out of my house, you pathetic failure." I did not flinch. I did not step back. I looked him dead in the eyes, maintaining perfect, unyielding eye contact. Before I could even open my mouth to respond, Beatrice arrived, breathless and panicking. She rushed up beside Jason, her face twisted into a mask of pure desperation and anger. "What is wrong with you?" Beatrice hissed, glancing around wildly to see if Naomi's family or the bank executives were watching the confrontation. "We told you to stay away. You have absolutely no right to be here ruining your brother's special day. Get off this property right now." Beatrice reached out and shoved her hands roughly against the shoulder of my emerald green suit jacket, trying to physically push me backward toward the Ironside gate. She pushed again, her rings snagging on the fine Italian wool. I planted my stiletto heels firmly into the stone patio, refusing to move a single inch. I looked down at my mother's trembling hands pushing against my chest, and then looked back up at Jason's furious red face. The commotion had finally drawn the attention of the elite crowd. The lively chatter closest to us abruptly died down. Several bank executives paused their conversations, turning to watch the bizarre scene unfolding at the edge of the patio. Naomi's father, the federal judge, stopped talking and narrowed his eyes, observing the sudden physical altercation. The audience Jason had so desperately craved was now giving us their full, undivided attention. This was exactly what I wanted to see happen today. I slowly raised my free hand, looked her directly in the eyes, and brushed Beatrice's trembling fingers completely off my jacket. With a single fluid motion. "Do not touch me," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, but carrying enough authority to make her instantly recoil. Jason stepped forward, his jaw clenched, preparing to unleash another barrage of humiliating insults. I did not give him the chance. I turned my shoulders, effectively rendering him entirely invisible, and walked straight past him. I moved through the opulent patio with the calculated stride of an apex predator tracking its target. The elite guests parted to make way for me, sensing the heavy, dangerous energy radiating from my emerald green suit. I kept my gaze fixed dead ahead, ignoring the confused murmurs rippling through the crowd. My target was standing near the edge of the cascading infinity pool. Thomas Bradley, the senior vice president of credit operations at Jason's bank. He was a tall, imposing man in his late 50s, holding a crystal glass of bourbon and chatting amiably with two other board members. He was the man Jason had spent months trying to impress, the ultimate gatekeeper to the promotion Jason desperately wanted. Jason had likely spent the entire morning fetching him drinks and laughing at his jokes, playing the role of the eager, brilliant subordinate. I stepped directly into Thomas Bradley's line of sight, smoothly interrupting his conversation. "Mr. Bradley," I said, extending my free hand. "I apologize for the interruption, but I believe we have some pressing corporate matters to discuss." Thomas raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by my sudden appearance and assertive introduction. He shifted his bourbon to his left hand and accepted my handshake. "I am sorry. Do we know each other?" he asked, his tone polite but guarded. "We have not met in person," I replied, maintaining a firm professional grip. "I am Clara. I am the chief executive officer of the financial technology firm that finalized the hostile acquisition of Vanguard Financial Compliance this past Thursday. My company is now the absolute regulatory authority overseeing the internal auditing protocols for your entire banking division. We sent you an encrypted memo regarding this transition 2 days ago." The polite confusion on Thomas Bradley's face vanished instantly, replaced by sharp, immediate corporate respect. The two board members standing next to him straightened their posture. In the banking world, regulatory compliance was the ultimate authority. A negative audit from an independent firm could trigger federal investigations, crash stock prices, and end careers overnight. "Ah, yes, the new CEO," Thomas said, his voice dropping into a serious, hushed tone. "I received your memo. We were quite surprised by the rapid nature of the Vanguard acquisition. I must admit, I was not expecting to meet you at a suburban housewarming party. I assumed we would be setting up formal meetings in boardroom settings next week." I smiled, holding his gaze with unyielding intensity. "Usually I prefer the boardroom, Mr. Bradley. However, my team conducted a preliminary shadow audit of your credit division utilizing our proprietary tracking algorithms. We discovered a severe catastrophic liability within your senior staff. The nature of the anomaly required immediate direct intervention before your institution suffered irreparable public damage." At that exact moment, Jason finally caught up to me. He lunged into the circle, completely abandoning his relaxed, charming facade. He was sweating, his eyes darting frantically between me and his boss. "Thomas, I am so sorry about this," Jason stammered, his voice cracking with panic. "This is my estranged sister. She has a history of severe mental instability, and she is just trying to cause a scene. I will have security escort her off the property immediately. Jason reached out to grab my arm. He never made contact. Do not interrupt her. Jason. Thomas barked, his voice cracking like a whip across the patio. The command was so harsh, so sudden, that Jason froze mid-step. He looked at his boss in absolute shock, his mouth hanging open. Thomas did not spare Jason another glance. He turned his full attention back to me, his corporate survival instincts fully activated. You mentioned a catastrophic liability, Clara. What exactly did your audit uncover? I lifted the heavy black leather briefcase and set it down onto a glass patio table next to us. I snapped the metallic latches open. The sound was loud and decisive. I pulled out the massive 3-inch thick federal fraud dossier and handed it directly to Thomas Bradley. You are currently standing on a property that was purchased using stolen equity and forged income statements. I explained, my voice loud enough for the surrounding bank executives to hear clearly. The man who approved the fraudulent loans to buy this $3 million estate is your credit director, Jason. He bypassed your internal underwriting protocols using his administrative overrides. Thomas set his bourbon down and opened the heavy black binder. The color began to drain from his face as he flipped to the first section. I did not stop speaking. I delivered the facts with surgical precision. Tab A contains the forged asset declarations Jason submitted to secure his primary mortgage. He inflated his guarantor's net worth by 800%. Tab B shows his secondary debt liabilities. He is currently moving invisible capital in a classic check-kiting scheme across 3 separate banking institutions to mask his massive defaults. Jason was physically trembling now. That is a lie, he gasped, his voice barely a whisper. Thomas, she is crazy. She fabricated all of this. Thomas did not look at him. He was staring at the highlighted documents, his hands gripping the edges of the binder so tightly his knuckles turned white. As a seasoned bank executive, Thomas knew exactly what he was looking at. The digital routing numbers, the timestamps, the authorization signatures. It was all undeniable. It was a perfectly documented trail of absolute financial ruin. It gets much worse. Mr. Bradley, I continued, driving the final nail into the coffin. If you turn to tab C, you will find proxy server logs extracted directly from Jason's corporate terminal at your bank. He has been logging in between 2 and 4 in the morning to actively route his connection through masked servers. He has been siphoning highly classified proprietary financial data from a rival commercial real estate firm. Your credit director is actively committing corporate espionage and federal wire fraud using your network infrastructure. Thomas Bradley turned completely pale. The healthy flush in his cheeks vanished, replaced by an ashen, sickly gray. He looked up from the binder, his eyes wide with genuine terror. If the federal authorities traced those server logs back to his bank, the institution would face unprecedented fines, federal sanctions, and a catastrophic loss of investor confidence. The magnitude of Jason's crimes threatened to pull the entire bank down with him. You used our terminal to steal classified data, Thomas whispered, finally looking at Jason. The executive disgust in his voice was absolute. You forged loan documents under my jurisdiction. You brought me to a house bought with stolen money. I can explain. Jason begged, tears of genuine panic welling in his eyes. He reached out toward his boss, his hands shaking violently. Thomas, please, you have to believe me. She set me up. Thomas stepped back, physically repulsed by Jason's proximity. You are completely finished, Jason. You are terminated, effective immediately. Do not ever contact me or anyone at the bank again. The powerful bank executive standing nearby stared at Jason as if he were a diseased animal. The elite socialites whispered frantically, the rumor spreading through the crowd like wildfire. The golden boy, the self-made titan of finance, was nothing but a desperate, pathetic criminal. I stood perfectly still, watching the absolute destruction of his professional life unfold exactly as I had orchestrated. But the true devastation had not even begun. This was only the first domino, and the rest were about to fall in rapid succession. Thomas Bradley turned on his heel and walked away with rapid, heavy strides, signaling his 2 board members to follow him immediately toward the valet station. He left the thick black dossier resting on the glass patio table, leaving it completely exposed for anyone else to see. The sound of his retreating footsteps felt like a gavel striking wood. Jason stood completely frozen for 3 agonizing seconds, his eyes wide and locked onto the empty space where his boss had just stood. The catastrophic reality of his situation crashed down on him. His career was entirely dead. The promotion he had desperately craved was gone forever. The elite status he had sacrificed his own family to maintain had vanished in the blink of an eye. He slowly turned his head back toward me, and I watched his initial shock curdle into absolute unhinged hysteria. "She is a pathological liar!" Jason suddenly screamed, his voice cracking loudly as he spun around to face the watching crowd. The sheer volume of his shout caused several guests to flinch backward. He pointed a shaking finger at my face, spit flying from his lips as he frantically tried to seize control of the narrative. "Do not listen to a single word she says. She forged those documents to frame me. She is severely mentally ill. She has been jealous of my success since we were children. She is a low-level clerk who cannot afford to pay her own rent, and now she is trying to destroy my life out of pure psychotic spite." His voice echoed sharply across the manicured lawn. The live jazz band had completely stopped playing, leaving his frantic screams to ring out in the oppressive silence. He was breathing heavily, sweat pouring down his forehead and soaking into the collar of his expensive linen suit. The charming, effortless host from 20 minutes ago was entirely gone, replaced by a desperate cornered animal thrashing wildly against the walls of a trap he could not escape. Before I could even register the sheer absurdity of his accusations, William and Beatrice violently pushed their way through the crowd. My mother's face was a twisted mask of maternal outrage and social panic. She had seen Thomas Bradley storm off, and she immediately realized the party was imploding. Instead of asking what had happened, instead of questioning the massive federal fraud dossier resting on the table, she immediately directed all of her toxic rage directly at me. "What is wrong with you, Beatrice?" shrieked, her voice shrill and trembling with fury. She rushed to Jason's side, wrapping her arms protectively around his shoulders as if he were a victimized child. "You ungrateful, malicious wretch! You came here specifically to ruin your brother's beautiful housewarming party. We explicitly told you there was no room for you in this family. How dare you bring your pathetic, jealous delusions into his home and embarrass him in front of his colleagues?" William puffed out his chest, stepping forward to loom over me with the hollow, artificial authority he had used to intimidate me my entire life. "Clara, you are leaving this property right this second," he demanded, his face red with anger. "If you do not walk out those gates immediately, I will personally call the police and have you arrested for trespassing and harassment. You have crossed a line you can never come back from. You are no longer my daughter." I looked at the three of them standing in a unified triangle of absolute delusion. They were literally screaming at me, completely ignoring the fact that Jason had stolen their identities and leveraged their financial future to buy the very ground they were standing on. They were so utterly conditioned to protect the golden child that they would blindly attack the woman holding the fire extinguisher while the house burned down around them. I did not raise my voice. I did not take a single step backward. I simply stood my ground, my posture perfectly straight, my hands resting calmly at my sides. The bespoke emerald green suit felt like absolute armor. I let their unhinged behavior contrast directly with my cold, unwavering silence. They were screaming, sweating, and losing their minds. I was perfectly still, staring at them with the detached curiosity of a scientist observing a failed experiment. "Please, William," I said, my voice smooth and chillingly calm. "Call the police. I highly encourage it. In fact, I insist you dial 911 right now and ask them to come to this address." My father hesitated, completely thrown off by my utter lack of fear. He expected me to cower. He expected me to cry and run away from his harsh discipline. My calm defiance caused a short circuit in his brain. The wealthy guests surrounding the patio began to react to the spectacle. The high society neighbors, the remaining junior bank executives, and the affluent socialites were visibly horrified. They were not horrified by me. They were repulsed by the screaming, sweating, frantic display of my family. In elite circles, loud public outbursts were considered the ultimate faux pas. The crowd began murmuring, exchanging wide-eyed glances as they physically stepped backward, creating a wide circle of isolation around Jason, Beatrice, and William. They were treating my family like a contagious disease. Naomi's prestigious family stood near the gift tables, their expressions hardening into masks of absolute legal scrutiny. Naomi's father, the federal judge, did not look at the screaming family. His sharp eyes were locked directly onto the black leather binder resting on the glass table. As a man who had spent his entire life in courtrooms, he recognized the distinct, terrifying format of a federal evidence dossier. He slowly placed a protective hand on his pregnant daughter's shoulder, guiding Naomi slightly backward away from her husband. Jason noticed the crowd pulling away. The physical rejection sent him into a deeper spiral of panic. He let out a ragged, desperate laugh, throwing his hands up in the air as he turned to the guests. "She is lying. I swear to you, she is completely insane. I am the credit director. I built this estate. I am providing for my wife. You all know me." His voice cracked pitifully on the last word. Nobody stepped forward to defend him. Nobody offered a comforting word. The caterers had quietly stopped passing out champagne, retreating toward the kitchen doors to avoid the fallout. The absolute silence of the crowd was deafening, a brutal confirmation that his meticulously crafted social mask had been completely ripped away. I looked at my mother, who was still clutching Jason's arm, her eyes darting nervously as she realized the elite guests were judging her. I looked at my father, who was staring at his phone, suddenly too afraid to actually dial the police. Finally, I looked at Jason, watching his chest heave with desperate, shallow breaths, as his entire fraudulent universe collapsed onto his shoulders. I did not need to scream to win this war. I just needed to let them destroy themselves in front of the exact audience they had tried so desperately to impress. Jason's breathing turned ragged as he scanned the faces of his guests. He saw nothing but revulsion. The absolute rejection from the elite crowd snapped the final fraying thread of his sanity. He let out a primal, guttural roar of pure rage. He lunged forward, raising his fist, fully intending to strike me across the face. I did not flinch or raise my arms to block him. I simply stared at his descending fist, knowing he would never make contact. Before he could even swing, a deafening, thunderous boom echoed through the sprawling mansion. The sound was so massive it vibrated through the stone patio beneath our feet. Someone had just struck the 12-foot custom mahogany front doors with a tactical battering ram. Jason froze. His fist hovered in the air, his eyes darting toward the open French doors that led into the main foyer. Beatrice gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. William took a sudden, frightened step backward. The remaining chatter on the patio instantly died. The sheer silence was punctuated only by a second violent crash that splintered the heavy wooden frame of the entrance. Federal agents. Chicago Police Department. Nobody move. The authoritative shout blasted through the cavernous interior of the estate. The heavy thud of tactical boots against the imported marble floors sounded like an invading army. Within seconds, a swarm of men and women wearing dark tactical vests, emblazoned with sharp yellow acronyms, flooded through the mansion. They moved with terrifying, coordinated precision. Local police officers fanned out across the perimeter, physically blocking the driveway, the side gates, and the rear exits. Nobody was leaving this property. Two federal agents burst through the patio doors, their hands resting firmly on their utility belts. Their eyes swept the frozen crowd of wealthy socialites, caterers, and bank executives. The lead agent, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a severe expression, held a thick stack of manila folders and a folded warrant. He locked eyes with Jason immediately. Jason dropped his raised fist. The false bravado evaporated from his body in a single second. His knees buckled slightly, his expensive linen suit suddenly looking 2 sizes too big for his shrinking frame. He opened his mouth to speak, but only a pathetic, breathless squeak came out. Jason Williams, the lead agent, barked, his voice carrying absolute, undeniable authority over the entire estate. "You are under arrest by order of the federal government." Beatrice let out a sharp, hysterical shriek. "Wait, stop. You have the wrong house. My son is a bank director. You cannot just barge in here. Do you know who we are?" The agent ignored my mother entirely. He marched directly across the stone patio, closing the distance to Jason in 3 massive strides. He held up the legal document, ensuring the entire crowd of elite guests could hear every single damning word. We have a federal warrant for your immediate arrest on 17 counts of wire fraud, bank fraud, aggravated identity theft, and corporate espionage. Turn around and place your hands behind your back. The words hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Wire fraud, bank fraud, identity theft, corporate espionage. The charges were not minor infractions. They were catastrophic headline-making federal crimes. The wealthy neighbors who had come to sip champagne and admire the property now stared at Jason as if he were a highly contagious plague. The bank executives who had lingered near the pool immediately turned their backs, pulling out their phones to urgently call their own legal counsel. They were actively distancing themselves from the radioactive crater Jason had just created. Jason did not turn around. He stood completely paralyzed, his eyes wide and vacant. He looked at the federal agent, then at the heavy steel handcuffs being pulled from the tactical belt. "No." Jason whispered, his voice trembling so violently he could barely form the word. "No, please. This is a mistake. I am the credit director. I own this house. I have money. I can fix this." "You do not own anything, Jason," I stated, my voice slicing through his pathetic begging. I stepped to the side, allowing the federal agents a clear, unobstructed path to my brother. "You are a fraud and your time is officially up." 2 agents grabbed Jason by the shoulders, forcefully spinning him around. The sharp metallic click of the handcuffs locking around his wrists echoed across the patio. It was the absolute, undeniable sound of his fake empire being permanently dismantled. Jason let out a choked, desperate sob as the cold steel bit into his skin. His legs gave out completely, and the agents had to physically haul him upward by his armpits to keep him from collapsing onto the stones. Seeing her golden child shackled like a common criminal completely shattered Beatrice's fragile reality. For 33 years, she had worshipped Jason. She had sacrificed my mental health, my financial stability, and my basic dignity to elevate him onto a pedestal. She had mortgaged my house to fund the very party that was now his execution block. "No, my baby!" Beatrice screamed, a raw, horrific sound that tore from the bottom of her lungs. "It is a mistake," Clara framed him. "She is jealous. She did this to him. Let him go." Beatrice lunged forward, her arms flailing wildly as she tried to physically push the federal agents away from Jason. A female officer immediately intercepted her, grabbing Beatrice by the shoulders and shoving her firmly backward. "Step back, ma'am, or you will be arrested for interfering with a federal investigation," the officer commanded harshly. Beatrice stumbled backward, her designer heels catching on the edge of a stone paver. The absolute shock of the physical rejection combined with the horrifying reality of her son's arrest caused her nervous system to completely overload. Her eyes rolled back in her head. She let out one final breathless gasp and collapsed straight down onto the patio. Her body hit the ground with a heavy thud, her expensive silk dress tangling around her legs, her diamond necklace scraping against the rough stone. William let out a panicked shout and dropped to his knees beside his unconscious wife. He frantically patted her face, looking up at the surrounding crowd with wide, terrified eyes. "Help her! Somebody help her!" he begged. Nobody moved. The caterers stared in shock. The wealthy guests looked away in utter disgust. I stood perfectly still in my emerald green suit, looking down at the people who had abused me my entire life. They were finally exactly where they belonged. Broken, humiliated, and utterly powerless. I felt no pity. I felt no remorse. I watched the agents drag a sobbing, handcuffed Jason toward the front of the mansion, leaving William weeping over Beatrice's collapsed body. The air was finally clear. The federal agents tightened their grip on Jason's arms, preparing to march him across the pristine lawn. Before they could take a single step toward the driveway, Naomi moved. She did not rush forward to comfort her husband like Beatrice had. She bypassed the pathetic, sobbing man completely and walked straight to the glass patio table. Her eyes were locked intensely onto the heavy black dossier that Thomas Bradley had abandoned. She flipped the thick leather cover open. Her father, the federal judge, stepped up right beside her, his sharp judicial instincts taking over as he looked over her shoulder at the highlighted documents. Naomi turned directly to the section detailing the secondary liability agreements. I watched her perfectly manicured finger trace the lines of the fraudulent contracts. She stared at the bottom of the page where her own elegant sloping cursive had been meticulously forged. Jason had legally bound her to his massive embezzlement scheme, weaponizing her pristine credit score and her family's impeccable reputation to secure millions in stolen capital. The betrayal washed over her features, transforming her initial shock into a cold, terrifying fury. Naomi was a proud woman from a lineage of brilliant Atlanta attorneys. She understood immediately that Jason had not just lied to her. He had actively attempted to destroy her financial future and her family's immaculate legacy. Her strict adherence to the law meant she viewed his actions not just as marital betrayal, but as a disgusting criminal violation. She refused to be dragged down into the mud by a man who had built a life on deceit. Naomi's pristine standing was her absolute armor, and she was preparing to cut off the infected limb to save herself. Naomi slammed the heavy binder shut. The sharp crack echoed over the patio, snapping Jason out of his hysterical sobbing. He looked up at his wife, his bloodshot eyes pleading for salvation. "Naomi, please," he whimpered, struggling uselessly against the federal agents holding his arms. "It is a misunderstanding. I did it for us. I did it for the baby. I wanted to give you the world." Naomi did not yell. She did not shed a single tear. She walked over to him with the absolute chilling composure of a judge delivering a death sentence. "You did not do this for me," she stated, her voice slicing through the humid afternoon air with lethal precision. "You did this because you are a weak, pathetic fraud. You forged my signature on federal loan documents. You tied my unborn child to a criminal enterprise to stroke your own fragile ego. You are nothing but a thief." Jason choked on a sob, shaking his head frantically, begging her to stop talking. Naomi raised her left hand. She grasped the massive, flawless diamond engagement ring that Jason had flaunted as proof of his success. She pulled the heavy stone off her finger in one swift, decisive motion. She threw the ring directly at his chest. It bounced off his expensive linen suit jacket and clattered loudly onto the stone pavers, rolling away into the manicured grass like a piece of worthless glass. "I am filing for divorce this afternoon," Naomi declared, never breaking eye contact. "My father's legal team will dismantle whatever is left of your miserable life. You will never see me or this child ever again." She turned her back on him, linking her arm through her father's, and walked away with her head held high. Her entire family followed her in a unified silent block, exiting the estate without a backward glance and leaving Jason completely shattered. Jason collapsed forward, his knees hitting the stone patio hard. He hung limply between the two federal agents, a hollow shell of the arrogant golden child who had tormented me for 33 years. His wife was gone. His career was vaporized. His mother lay unconscious nearby, and his father was paralyzed by impending financial ruin. I picked up my leather briefcase from the table and walked slowly toward him. My stiletto heels clicked rhythmically against the stone, measuring the final seconds of his reign. I relished every single step, knowing this was the absolute end of the torment I had endured since childhood. The lead federal agent saw me approaching and paused, giving me exactly 10 seconds to finish what I started. I unlatched the briefcase and pulled out the crisp white legal foreclosure notice. It was printed on heavy cardstock bearing the official seal of the county recorder and the bold branding of Obsidian Asset Management. I stepped right into Jason's line of sight. He looked up at me, his face completely wet with tears and sweat, his eyes hollow with absolute defeat. He finally realized that the woman he had pushed toward the kitchen trash cans last night was the undisputed architect of his total destruction. I leaned in close, bringing my face just inches from his ear. I took the folded legal document and slid it smoothly into the breast pocket of his ruined linen suit jacket. By the way I whispered, ensuring my voice was perfectly pitched so that every remaining guest on the patio could hear my final decree. My company bought your debt yesterday. I own this house. I own the ground you are kneeling on. You have exactly 30 minutes to get your trash off my property before my private security team throws it into the street. The lead agent hauled Jason to his feet and marched him away toward the waiting police cruisers. The heavy iron gates of the estate stood open, ready to swallow him whole. I stood alone on the patio, the undisputed owner of the battlefield, watching the flashing red and blue lights paint the suburban sky. Jason thrashed violently against the iron grip of the federal agents as they marched him down the sweeping stone pathway toward the flashing police cruisers. He twisted his neck to look back at the patio, his face contorted into a mask of feral rage. The realization that he had lost absolutely everything finally severed his last tether to reality. He began screaming obscenities, hurling vile insults at me, at the agents, and even at the wealthy guests who were actively fleeing the scene. He cursed the bank that fired him and cursed the proud Atlanta family that abandoned him. His tailored linen suit tore at the shoulder seam as he desperately tried to break free completely, ruining the expensive fabric he had used to project his fake authority. It was a pathetic, chaotic display of a narcissist losing his entire world. The agents shoved him forcefully into the back of an unmarked federal vehicle, slamming the heavy door shut and instantly cutting off his frantic screaming. The engine roared to life, and the convoy sped down the pristine gravel driveway, taking the golden child away to a cold concrete cell. The departure of the police vehicles acted as a starting gun for the remaining guests. Absolute panic rippled through the elite crowd. Bank executives rushed to their luxury cars, frantically dialing their public relations teams to distance their own names from Jason's catastrophic fraud. The caterers immediately stopped serving. They began rapidly packing up the silver trays, the towering champagne displays, and the expensive hors d'oeuvres, eager to escape a property that was now an active federal crime scene. Naomi's prestigious family moved with swift, unified dignity. They did not run, but their absolute disgust was palpable. They carried their elegantly wrapped baby shower gifts right back out the front gates, refusing to leave a single ounce of their wealth in a house built on malicious lies. The jazz band packed their instruments in dead silence, fleeing through the side exit. Within 15 minutes, the sprawling manicured lawn was completely abandoned. The extravagant housewarming party had turned into a ghost town of half-empty crystal glasses and discarded linen napkins scattered across the grass. I remained standing on the stone patio, watching the chaotic exodus with absolute calm. The emerald green suit I wore felt like an impenetrable shield against the destruction unfolding around me. The only people left on the entire estate were William and Beatrice. My mother was slowly regaining consciousness on the hard stone pavers. She groaned, clutching her head, her expensive silk dress stained with spilled champagne and dirt. William knelt beside her, his face ashen and hollow. He was not looking at his wife or offering her any comfort. His eyes were locked entirely onto the heavy black dossier that still rested on the glass patio table. The federal agents had taken Jason, but I had deliberately left a copy of the financial evidence behind for my parents to review. William reached out with a trembling hand and pulled the thick binder closer to his chest. He began flipping through the crisp pages, his breath catching in his throat as his eyes scanned the highlighted sections my corporate lawyer had prepared. William stared at the secondary mortgage documents, the exact paperwork he and Beatrice had eagerly signed just weeks ago. They had bypassed traditional income verification by leveraging the suburban house I had foolishly put in Beatrice's name years ago. They thought they were simply providing a temporary safety net for Jason's $3 million mansion. They believed Jason was a wealthy bank director who would easily cover the monthly premiums with his executive bonuses. But the federal audit laid out the brutal, undeniable truth in stark black and white ink. Jason had forged their income declarations, inflating their net worth by millions of dollars to secure the massive private loan. He had committed severe wire fraud, and he had legally bound William and Beatrice directly to the criminal enterprise. Because they had willingly co-signed the fraudulent loans to protect their precious son, They were no longer just innocent bystanders. They were the primary guarantors of a massive, defaulting federal debt. I watched the exact moment the horrifying reality crashed into my father's mind. The color completely drained from his face, leaving him looking like a terrified ghost. His hands shook so violently that the heavy binder slipped from his grasp, crashing onto the stone patio with a loud thud. William realized that Jason did not just ruin his own career. Jason had financially annihilated his parents. The bank would not just seize the suburban house to cover the debt. The federal authorities and the ruthless private lenders would immediately come after every single asset William and Beatrice possessed to recoup the stolen millions. Their modest pension, their retirement savings, their vehicles, and their personal bank accounts were all legally forfeit. They had gleefully sacrificed my financial security to elevate their golden child, and in return, their golden child had dragged them directly into total and absolute bankruptcy. William dropped his head into his hands, letting out a ragged, agonizing sob that echoed across the empty patio. Beatrice finally sat up, rubbing her temples and looking around the deserted lawn in absolute confusion. She saw the police lights fading in the distance and realized her perfect son was actually gone. She turned to William, demanding to know what was happening, begging him to fix the situation and bring Jason back. William could not even look at her. He just stared at the legal documents scattered across the stone floor, realizing they were facing absolute ruin and they had absolutely no legal defense to save themselves from the impending federal fallout. He knew their comfortable suburban life was completely over, replaced by crushing debt and total public shame. Beatrice finally ripped her gaze away from the deserted lawn and looked at the documents scattered across the stone patio. She saw the foreclosure notice bearing my corporate logo near his shaking hands. The truth of my wealth finally penetrated her rising panic. I was no longer the pathetic daughter to be hidden away. I was a CEO holding the power to undo the catastrophic damage her golden child had just inflicted. Beatrice scrambled across the stone patio. She threw herself directly at my feet, falling heavily onto her knees against the hard pavers. Her hands shot out, grabbing the pristine fabric of my emerald green suit jacket. She gripped the wool so tightly, her knuckles turned white, dragging herself upward from the ground as she began sobbing hysterically. Her mascara ran down her cheeks in dark lines, completely destroying the elegant facade she had maintained for decades. "Clara, you have to help us right now," Beatrice wailed, her voice cracking with raw terror. "You have the money. I heard what you said to the executives. You own this entire house. You own the auditing firm. You clearly have millions of dollars at your disposal. Please, you must pay Jason's bail. You have to hire him the best defense lawyers and pay off these debts before the federal government takes everything from your father and me." She pulled frantically at my jacket, trying to force me to look at her with the sympathy she had deliberately starved me of for 33 years. She weaponized the one concept she had consistently used to exclude me. "We are family." "Clara," she screamed, her voice echoing off the empty mansion walls. "You cannot let your own flesh and blood rot in a federal prison cell. You cannot let your parents go bankrupt and live on the streets. We are your family. You owe us your absolute protection. Please save your brother. Save your real family." I did not flinch or pull away from her sudden grip. I simply looked down at the woman who had spent my entire life making me feel completely worthless. My eyes were dead, reflecting absolutely zero emotion, zero pity, and zero hesitation. I looked at her the exact same way she had looked at me when she pushed me toward the kitchen doors the night before. I reached down and firmly detached her trembling, desperate fingers from my custom-tailored wool suit. "When you happily made me sit by the kitchen trash can last night, I stated my voice as cold and sharp as cracked ice. You clearly told me that the table was for family only." Beatrice froze the breath, catching sharply in her throat as she realized the absolute finality burning in my eyes. "Prison is for Jason," I said. "Have a nice life." I turned my back on her, hysterical sobbing, walked straight across the marble foyer, and stepped out the heavy front doors into the afternoon sun, leaving my toxic family behind forever. 6 months have passed since I walked out of those heavy front doors and left that fraudulent life behind forever. I am currently standing on the expansive balcony of my high-rise corporate office, a steaming cup of black coffee in my hand, looking out over the sprawling, beautiful skyline of Chicago. The air is crisp and the morning sun reflects brilliantly off the glass buildings surrounding me. The absolute peace I feel right now was worth every single calculated move I made to protect my empire. The federal justice system moved with efficiency once my auditing firm handed over the dossiers. Jason is currently serving a 20-year sentence in a federal prison stripped of his stolen wealth and fragile ego. Blood does not make a family, respect does. Never set yourself on fire to keep toxic people warm. Have you ever had to cut ties with a toxic family member to protect your peace? Tell me your story in the comments.